Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Bible teaching snippet of the day. Well, today, Bible teacher's just going to put her brakes on and just stop. And I'm going to reteach and clarify some things that I talked about yesterday. Now, it was my plan just to answer another question or two about unclean spirits, and then by Monday I could start a new subject. But you know what? I know I went really, really deep yesterday, and some people may not have ever heard anything about what I talked about, and I went too far, too fast, too deep, and I don't ever want to do that. I don't look, the Word of God and God's overall plan and everything that has happened from Genesis all the way through to the end of the book in Revelation is not complicated, but we do have to have a certain overview to understand why certain things happened, okay? So I want to just slow down and reteach this today and clarify some things that I taught yesterday. Now, the teaching started with me answering a question about, can an animal have an unclean spirit? And I said absolutely, because I've actually cast out spirits of sickness off of animals and the spirit of fear off of animals, because I've seen animals that were in this state of always just being really hyper and a little bit edgy, and that is, and it's not always, but a lot of times it's an unclean spirit on them of fear, and that animal is being tormented by that spirit of fear. But that's probably another teaching too, isn't it? But when I talked about, yes, animals can have unclean spirits, I went into talking about two specific times that God commanded that an entire tribe be exterminated, including the animals in the city. And I should probably say this. I believe that the reason God wanted even the animals to be destroyed and the city to be burned, okay, is the animals had unclean spirits on them, okay? And another reason he wanted the city burned was because there was idols and stuff in that city that he was trying to get rid of, okay? Now, I know that a lot of people don't believe that objects can open doorways for demonic spirits, but that simply is not what the true Bible and the real writings that were pulled out of our Bibles, and even in the Old Testament, I can show you things to prove to you that it's not just a piece of stone that has absolutely no power, or a rock, or a carving, or a trinket or something. No, these things absolutely can pull in demonic activity, and God was trying to destroy and purge that, as well as the animals who had unclean spirits, the people who had these mixed bloodlines, okay? Now today I'm just going to stop here, and I'm going to read something I wrote last night, and and then I will teach a little bit more on this, okay? Because I really want to be very clear in what I'm teaching so people have understanding, okay? And I just wrote this last night. I went very, very deep, and I talked about why God commanded specific tribes to be completely destroyed. God was trying to remove the Nephilim, that's the fallen angel, human women, mixing, breeding, and that's the Nephilim, or the giant bloodline. They are the enemies of God and His creation, and they are fatal to mankind, okay? This is not about cohabitation and coexisting. This is about, and this isn't in my notes, this is about God's original creation of mankind ruling and governing over the earth, being in God's likeness and nature, his image and likeness, His character and nature. God created human beings to be like Him. And in the beginning, we were, and that's why He could hand the earth over and say, here, rule this, because all we knew was goodness. Okay. Then evil comes along, Satan is what we call it, and he comes into the garden and he overthrows the plan of God for the earth to be a physical replica of the spirit realm of heaven. And he wanted to usurp God and have his own kingdom here on earth. And from there, we have been in a battle of two kingdoms. This is the overview. It's two kingdoms, the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of darkness. And from there, we have the clash of two kingdoms. And it really is that simple, guys. Okay? So the next thing I want to talk about, I guess, is I want to go back and talk just a little bit about Genesis chapter 6 through 13. And this is yesterday when I said that Noah was the only man who still had a pure human-only bloodline. And I'm going to read this to you. It says, "And these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man." Our English Bibles sometimes say righteous man, okay? "And perfect in his generations." Perfect in his generations, it actually says that his genes or his DNA were perfect, that it had not been mingled with the giant bloodlines, okay? All right. So, but here we see, as it keeps going, it talks about how the earth had become corrupt and the earth was filled with violence, and that God was sorry that he had created this because it became a kingdom of darkness, okay? And here it says here in verse 13, "And the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them in the earth." Okay, now the next thing I want to do is go over to Genesis chapter 7, and I want to read you a little bit about this, okay? "And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills, the mountains that were under the heavens, were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both fowl and cattle and beast, and of every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth, and every man. All whose nostrils was the breath of life of all that was in the dry land died." Okay. The reason I wanted to read this is I want you to, and I talked about how Enoch classified and told us there was 3 different giants classes. The first one is called the great giants, and that's the ones that were so tall that they devoured the whole earth, and they literally had devoured all the animals, either mutated them or mutated the bloodlines of humans, where they are a mix of their bloodline, and there was no more pure bloodline other than the ones who had lived had died, other than Noah and his 3 sons, okay, and their wives, and his wife Noah. So it's 8 people total. I should classify that. Okay. So what we see, though, is these huge, the great giants. The reason they're classified as great giants is because those were the really oversized beings. And they literally were eating men because they were out of food. And watch, they even started turning on each other and hunting each other because the earth could not support them. Okay. So the reason that God, look, you don't have to flood the entire earth 15 cubics, which, by the way, is about 22 and a half feet if you use the 18 inches per cubic. But to kill them, to make sure that 6-foot men drowned, you do not have to cover every mountain top 22 and a half feet taller than any mountain. God's purpose in that was to make sure that the oversized giants would die in that flood, okay? Now, the next thing I want to do is move from there and tell you that so God started over with Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, okay? So what we see in the resurgence of the giant bloodline, now this is what I believe. There's 2 or 3 different theories out there. One theory is that we have more fallen angels coming and mixing with human women again. I personally do not buy into that because I've studied very deep on this, and this is what's kind of settled for me, okay? I believe that one of Noah's daughter-in-laws probably had a small amount of Nephilim bloodline in her, okay? And from there, that's where the resurgence of the giants, and the reason they're smaller and they're not tall, and we're talking hundreds of feet tall, by the way, The reason the Nephilims, what we see in our writings here, the Nephilims were smaller giants because they weren't the direct first offspring of the giants and human women, okay? And I'll just throw this in so you can understand where I'm going here. Did you know that I have Indian blood in me? Yes, my mother's side of her family has some Indian blood in her. I believe it's Cherokee. But did you know that from my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my mother and to me, look at me. You cannot see, unless you see my nose a little bit. I might have a little of that. But what I'm saying is you would not meet me and readily see that small amount of the Cherokee bloodline in me. And this is what I believe is that after the Noahic flood, and if you follow his three sons, okay, if you follow Shem, Ham, and Japheth, you will find that Shem is the only son that does not have in the genealogy any of the giants. His is the pure bloodline, and the other two you will see have giants reproducing in their bloodlines. I believe that only one of the daughter-in-laws had a little bit of giant blood in her that was not noticeable, but then Ham and Japheth, their families may have married within each other, okay? And there would have been another mixing right there for even a smaller set of giants as well, okay? And I know even on the simplest level, this is probably just a little bit deep, but hopefully I have brought clarity, because it's never ever my intent to ever confuse anybody in anything that I teach, okay? But here we have these fallen angels who have defied God and said, no, we will not be serving mankind, these humans that you made in your likeness and image. Instead, we will overthrow your plan. We will take the earth and we will rule the earth. They're not our friends. They are our enemies, and they hate us because God created us, human beings, in his likeness and image with his character and nature, and he gave us the kingdom of earth as an extension of the kingdom of heaven, okay? And he put us here to have a physical replica of heaven. And these fallen angels were angry with God because God created another being called mankind that would be over them and that they would serve and help us. And I pray that this has made sense today. And God bless you. And maybe tomorrow, even though it's Sunday, I may post another teaching, and that way I can answer the questions about unclean spirits, and we can start fresh on Monday and move forward on some other subjects. But I love each and every one of you, and I hope that I have clarified some of my very complicated teachings from yesterday. I think that I'm done. I did talk to you about the three different races of the giants, and as they came to be, they're smaller. And I just wanted to clarify that too. And that's the last that I have on my notes. So I'm going to go ahead and close out today, and I pray that this teaching has clarified what I talked about yesterday. I'll see you here again, and I love you. Bye-bye.